What an extraordinary moment. And greetings and welcome to everyone. Allow me, of course, to recognize His Excellency, but I will formally introduce him later. Suffice at this moment to welcome all of our ministers, Minister Johnson, Minister Morris, welcome to you both, and all of your governmental colleagues, all of my colleagues here at the UWI, all of our excellencies who are here, our students, and our friends and colleagues online. I welcome you to this special forum on reparatory justice, which has been requested by our distinguished guest. As you all know, he is now our presidential leader of the global reparatory justice movement. So we here at UWI, and I'm told I must specify which hat I am wearing. And I'm told that I should say that I'm the chairman of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, but I take great pleasure in acknowledging that I happen to be the Vice Chancellor of our university as well. And of course, I was informed that our former Prime Minister, the Most Honourable P.J. Patterson, was going to be here, and maybe he's not here, but I know he wanted to be here. Mr. President, I wish to inform you that our University of the West Indies here is the sister university of your University of Ghana. They were both established in 1948, so we are shipmates. So it is our sister institution on the African continent. The University of Lagos came 1 year later, so we see them as a baby sibling over in Lagos. And of course, with the University of Ghana, we have many old bonds. We have been partnering on programs over the decades, and we are now entering a period where we are going to be exchanging students in the medical program as well. Now, those of us in the history fraternity who have been following the conversations in detail and researching about that transatlantic trade in enchained African ancestors, we know that about 30% of all of the African people here in the Caribbean are from the space which is now called Ghana. So we have a lot of people in here who are walking around with Fanti blood, Ga, Asante, a lot of Akan people in here. And when I last did my analysis, I was told that I am 38% Akan. But here we are. Now, I think now that my colleagues are referring to me from time to time as an elder, now, so I have arrived, okay? But the whole reason for being an elder is to tell stories, right? So I am now entering my storytelling phase, and I want to give you, Mr. President, a little story. 2008, I happened to have been in Kumasi, invited by the Asantehene, King Ose Tutu II, and he, as Chancellor of the University in Kumasi, he asked me to give a public lecture on the Akan, especially the Ashantis, the rebellions in the Caribbean that were organized and led by the Ashantis. Okay, so I'm in the middle of Ashanti land, okay? And I'm telling the Ashantis about the havoc they were reaping on this part of the world. So I chose the subject of the Berbice rebellion of 1763. Now, in 1763, the Ashantis organized a massive rebellion against slavery. They defeated the Dutch and drove the Dutch out of Berbice. Okay? Then Kofi who was the leader of the rebellion, was installed in a classical ceremony of the stool. So Kofi became the Asantehene of Berbice, okay? In classical Ghanaian style. But his military commander was not happy with his foreign policy because the English had approached the king and said to him, well, King Kofi, listen, Berbice is a big place. Why don't we split it in half? You can have half of it for your African kingdom, but we need the other half for plantation slavery. Okay? So King Kofi was about to negotiate, but his military commander, Atta, said, no way. No negotiations, can't trust them, no deal. So Atta and Kofi went to war. At which stage, everyone in the audience was cracking up in laughter. I couldn't hear my own voice. The reason being that at that moment in Ghana, the presidential elections were being fought by Atta and Kofi. Isn't that remarkable? Atta Mills and Kofi Kufuor. So, what can I say? They are at it again. 200 years later, and Atta and Kofi were still at it. But the remarkable thing about that story also is that the incumbent Kufuor, his first name was John. The challenger, Atta Mills, his name was also John. And our president's name is also John. Now, how do we explain these extraordinary coincidences of history and future? But I will tell you quickly about the order of the program. The program will begin with a presentation from our distinguished minister. Minister, we will invite you in a moment to please give your intervention. That will be followed by an intervention from Mrs. Lolita Davis, who will be representing Honorable Minister Babsy Grange. So you will follow seamlessly and give your presentation. Thereafter, I shall return to the podium to introduce His Excellency, who will make an intervention in his role as our presidential leader of the global reparatory justice movement. And we will hear from the president his views on what are the next steps that we must take in the global reparatory justice movement. After His Excellency has made his presentation, the program says that he and I would sit comfortably in these chairs and have a 20-minute dialogue. It's what the Americans will call a fireside chat, but there's no fire and but a chat, okay? Which will be followed by a Q&A from the audience, and we will take 5 questions from the audience, if we have them, and we will take 3 questions from our online viewers. Thereafter, we will invite the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Graduate Studies, Professor Henry Lee, to come and give closing remarks. And thereafter, we can all have a glass of wine. I don't think we have wine, but anyway, we will all celebrate and allow the President to continue on his many other engagements. So, on that note, Honourable Minister, please.
I need to put on my glasses because I am getting older.
Not quite.
Your Excellency, John Mahama, President of the Republic of Ghana, Senator the Honourable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Jamaica. And I usually say something right after it. and I'm not going to do it today, about how wonderful she is. The Honorable Samuel Blackwell, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ghana, and who tells me that I am his relative. So I claim him as my brother. The Honorable Ernest Genfi, Deputy Minister for Defense, Mrs. Lalita Davis-Mattis, Chair of the National Council on Reparations, who's representing the Honorable Olivia Babsy Grange, our Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies and many other things, members of the government and delegation of the Republic of Ghana, heads of regional bodies, members of the diplomatic corps, distinguished academics, advocates, and invited guests. I see some students and student leaders, friends of Jamaica and Ghana, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is my distinct honor, on behalf of the Prime Minister of Jamaica, Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, and the government and people of Jamaica, to welcome His Excellency President John Dramani Mahama and his delegation to this special high-level reparation dialogue. Mr. President Akwaba, welcome to Jamaica again. Mr. President, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah once spoke of honoring the depths from which we came. In that connection, we are aware of the impact of the philosophies and opinions of the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey, Jamaica's first national hero and Pan-Africanist. And his influence was marked on shaping the vision for Dr. Nkrumah, who stated in his autobiography that, quote, "But I think that of all the literature that I studied, the book that did more than any other to fire my enthusiasm was the philosophy and opinions of Marcus Garvey, published by his wife," end quote. This enduring philosophical and spiritual connection is forever enshrined in the black star of the Ghanaian flag and symbolizes not only Garvey's initiative toward black enterprise through the Black Star Liner, but also African freedom, emancipation, and unity against colonialism. President Mahama, your presence with us today is deeply significant. Jamaica and Ghana are separated geographically by the Atlantic Ocean, but we are united by history, ancestry, culture, and a shared determination to build a future in which the dignity of African people is fully recognized and honored. Ghana and Jamaica have walked together for longer than either of our nations has been formally free. Ghana's independence in 1957 under the leadership of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah lit a torch that Jamaica and the wider Caribbean carried forward in our own journeys to nationhood. It was Jamaica and Ghana who, again, standing together, helped move the United Nations to designate 1968 as the International Year for Human Rights, and who worked jointly towards the convening of the International Conference on Human Rights in Tehran, initiatives credited with energizing the United Nations' entire human rights program. We've been at this for a long time. And it's important that our young students, the younger people here, understand this history and understand when we're talking about this state visit that it is a history that's deep and that we've been able to accomplish a lot together. For many Jamaicans, Ghana represents an ancestral homeland and the center of Pan-African thought, independence, and possibility. The bonds between our peoples extend beyond conventional diplomacy. Our bonds are bonds of blood, memory, identity, and common purpose. It is particularly fitting that we convene this dialogue during Jamaica's emancipation and independence season, a period in which we remember both the formal ending of chattel slavery and the achievement of political independence. Some question the purpose of today's conversation. Reparatory justice is about understanding how the past continues to shape present global inequalities and determining what must be done to secure a more just future. For the government of Jamaica, reparation concerns the restoration of dignity, the repair of communities, and the creation of fairer opportunities for our people. In our view, it must include serious attention to education, health, cultural renewal, economic development, technology, institutional capacity, and the ability of developing nations to determine their own paths. CARICOM's reparations framework positions this agenda as one of justice, healing, and development. The recent strengthening of the regional reparations program demonstrates that the Caribbean remains committed to sustained engagement with those states and institutions that benefited from the transatlantic trafficking and enslavement of African people and the genocide of indigenous peoples. That continuity has been renewed with great purpose in recent times. On the 25th of March, 2026, Jamaica joined 122 other nations in supporting the Ghana-led United Nations resolution declaring the trafficking of enslaved Africans and the racialized chattel enslavement of Africans the gravest crime against humanity. This was a resolution informed in part by the scholarship of our own historian, Professor Vereen Shepherd. Weeks later, Jamaica stood with Ghana again at the Next Steps conference in Accra, where the Honorable Olivia Grange led our delegation in adopting the Accra Next Steps commitment on reparatory justice, and where gifts were exchanged between our governments. This included paintings of the African village at Seville St. Anne, which stands as a small but sincere symbol of friendship that spans the Atlantic. Today's dialogue also takes place against the backdrop of a landmark development in formal relationship between our two countries. At the third session of the Ghana-Jamaica Permanent Joint Commission for Cooperation held in Accra in May of this year, led by our wonderful Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kamina Johnson-Smith, and our new brother, my new brother, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ghana. And at that meeting, both our governments agreed to amend Article 1 of the 2005 Agreement on Cooperation in the field of arts and culture, broadening it to expressly encompass entertainment and the creative industry, and most significantly, the pursuit of restitution, repatriation of cultural property, and reparatory justice as shared national commitments. Education is central to this work. We cannot repair what we do not understand, and we cannot secure justice when generations remain disconnected from their history. Our schools, our universities, and our cultural institutions must continue equipping our young people with an honest understanding of the forces that shaped the modern world, while also teaching them about the resistance, ingenuity, and achievements of African and Caribbean peoples. Dialogues like this is very, very important, and I see it missing in our schools. And as Minister of Education, I will have to work even harder to ensure that our young people, so many of them feel unmoored. They feel like they're just drifting, and it's because they don't have a deep sense of their identity, and it's not deeply rooted. And that's what conversations like this, if we can drill it down to our younger people, we can move our countries forward. I have to acknowledge the University of the West Indies, who has been a central player in this mission and is important to the international reparations movement through its scholarship, advocacy, and institution building. Professor Beckles, I'm proud to be able to unequivocally say that the UE has helped to move reparatory justice from the margins of public discussion to the center of regional diplomacy. Congratulations. Ladies and gentlemen, President Mahama brings an immense wealth of experience and sustained advocacy to this conversation. His participation signals the seriousness with which this matter is being treated at the highest levels of political leadership. Mr. President, Jamaica is honored by your presence. We look forward to your reflections and to the dialogue that will follow with Vice Chancellor Beckles. We meet at a moment of active diplomatic significance. Jamaica is preparing to file its petition before His Majesty King Charles III, and we're deeply conscious of and grateful for the solidarity our Ghanaian partners have shown as that process advances. So, Mr. President, may today's engagement deepen the bonds between Ghana and Jamaica, strengthen the bridge between Africa and the Caribbean, and move us closer to a world founded not merely on acknowledgement of historical wrongs, but on meaningful repair, human dignity, and justice. Once again, on behalf of the Prime Minister, the government, and people of Jamaica, I extend a warm Jamaican welcome to you, President Mahama, and to your delegation. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, permit me, ladies and gentlemen, to adopt the protocols established by the Honourable Minister. But let me also welcome the members of the National Council on Reparation Jamaica, as well as to recognize the officers of the University of the West Indies. Mr. President, this is a note to you from the Honourable Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, the Honourable Olivia Babsy-Grange. She seeks to address you in two capacities. One, as a daughter of the soil of Jamaica, and secondly, as a Minister of Government. I start at the former. We have read of each other, Mr. President, in history books, written by those who took us away from you. Those pages spoke of separation, of cargo, of loss, of an ocean cross in one direction through the so-called door of no return. What they did not tell us, however, is that the separation was not complete. Something traveled with us across that water which no manifest could record and no auction could sell. We speak of Africa as the motherland, and rightly so, but in every sense that matters to a people rebuilding itself, Africa is our fatherland as well. The place from which our names, our line, our very authority descends. It is a family we seek to return to, not to a single ceremony, continually, physically, when the journey allows it, emotionally always, and spiritually without interruption. Ours is not merely a shared biology. Ours is an eclectic ancestral bond, woven from language half remembered, rhythm never lost, and faith carried in the body long after it was carried out of memory. This is why we have learned not to speak of reparation as a single act, as though any sum, however large, could close an account this old. Reparation calls for healing. It calls for reconciliation. It calls for sharing of knowledge, of opportunity, of each other's futures, far more than it calls for homecoming alone. Because this is not an event, Mr. President, it is a movement, a continuum, and in truth, it has no end. There is no closing ceremony for a family finding its way back to itself. There is only the steady expansion of relationship and a deepening understanding of who we are to one another. That understanding is already taking practical shape between our two nations. Mr. President, I now address you as a Minister of Government. This year, Ghana and Jamaica revived our Permanent Joint Commission for Cooperation. We did not merely speak. We signed. Ghanaian nurses and health professionals are now arriving to serve alongside ours under an arrangement built deliberately on partnership, not on extraction. Conversations continue on teachers, on defense, on tourism and trade, and our Honourable Minister has already elaborated on some of those areas. That living connection was made physical earlier this year when soldiers of the Ghana Army Engineer Reconstruction Team, already assisting Jamaica in the recovery from Hurricane Melissa, turned their hands to a different kind of rebuilding. In just 12 days, on the grounds of the Civil Heritage Park in St. Anne, one of the very first places on this island to receive our ancestors, they raised 2 traditional African houses and an open cooking hearth, a gift from the government and people of Ghana. These houses stand today, Mr. President, and we understand that you'll be visiting the site soon. But when you do, you will not be touring an exhibit. You'll be visiting a home your own people built on the soil where our shared story in this hemisphere first began. Mr. President, we no longer speak of reparation as an emotional song sung by those who once called us victims. It has become this year a global political reality, one that demands recognition and one that demands accountability. Some among our nation, that profited most from our ancestors' captivity remain tardy, even reticent in acknowledging the full scale of what they did. But Ghana's resolution, now a United Nations resolution itself, has settled a question too long left open. It has fixed in permanent language of international law that the capture, the trafficking, and the chattel enslavement of our ancestors is the gravest crime ever committed against humanity. This is not a tacit nod towards history. It is a formal reminder of the culpability of the states who carried it out. No longer may this crime be folded quietly into the general forgiving language of crimes against humanity and left there unnamed and unaddressed. It is a profound thing, Mr. President, that the land from which most of us descended has, like a faithful parent, begun to write the claim on behalf of its lost children. Children whose cries have carried over seas, over valleys, over mountains, for 400 odd years without answer. That answer is finally arriving. But let us be clear about what kind of moment this is. It is not a beginning or for parents began this labor long before we were born. It is rather a new beginning, the kind the prophet Isaiah described when he said, "Behold, I will do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth. Shall ye not know it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." Mr. President, a way is being built. Rivers are rising in places we were told remain dry forever. It is for that reason that Jamaica received with deep honor the news that our own Prime Minister, Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, has been named to Ghana's newly established Global Advisory Council on Reparatory Justice alongside Prime Minister Myanmar Motley of Barbados, the veteran reparatory justice statesman Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, our Vice President, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Chairman of the Caribbean Reparations Commission, and Vice Chancellor of the University. That such a council, it now exists, political, strategic, and unapologetically global in its ambition, tells us that this movement has left the realm of sentiment and entered the realm of governance. Great things lie ahead of us. Great things lie ahead of us, Mr. President. A perpetual homecoming patiently awaits each and every one of us, and we will keep walking towards it. What we are witnessing is nothing less than the evolution of a people, a rebirth, a global reckoning whose time has finally come. Jamaica is honored to walk the road with Ghana. Akwaba, Mr. President. Jamaica is your home too.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you. Those of you who have not traveled to Ghana, ought to do so straight away. On the coast of Ghana are two enormous limestone structures, one at Elmina and the other at Cape Coast. These were the structures that were used to warehouse our ancestors. They would warehouse us in the thousands, and the ships would come to the back door, and the Africans were marched through that door onto the ships that were lined up as they are in the Strait of Hormuz. So they would line up, and the Africans were marched onto them one by one, and off they came across the Atlantic. 8 weeks to Jamaica, 7 weeks to Barbados, and they were going. Now, each of those warehouses, that door through which the Africans were marched onto the ships, was called the door of no return. Because once you were marched through that door, that was the end of that. A month ago, all of us, many of us here, were the guests of the president in Accra. And he welcomed us in a ceremony entitled The Door of Return. So that was a powerful philosophical and seminal comprehension of what is taking place. The door of return is open in Africa, and those of us, the diaspora, are expected to go through that door. So all of you, take your children. Now, I am not surprised that our president has emerged as the presidential champion in Africa of the reparatory justice movement. And I should take this opportunity, Mr. President, to say to the people, the Rastafarian movement especially, that started this struggle in earnest 100 years ago, 90 to 100 years ago, never gave up, and who maintained the position that there are stolen people. And that is why in our reparatory justice program, we have the concept and the pillar of repatriation. Stolen people, as the Rastafarians have consistently said from the 1930s, we are stolen people. We have a right to return from whence we were stolen. And that principle has been the spine of this movement for nearly 100 years. So we say, big up the Rasta. Our president is a leader who has emerged through the ranks. He was not imposed upon his country as the president. He came up through the ranks. He was a lowly MP. Lowly MP, working hard for his country, in the vineyard, in the people, in the community, working hard. Then he became a minister. And having distinguished himself as a minister, he became a vice president. And finally, after many years, the people of his country have endorsed him as their president. Having recognized myself as an elder, he is a youngster because he was born after the independence era. He's not one of us who lived in the colonial period and then lived in the independence period. He is a child of the independence decade. So that makes him a youngster. But his career has been distinguished by service at the national, regional, continental, and global level. I first heard of him in action when he was presiding over the Economic Community of West African States. Then I became even more attracted to his thinking when he was an advisor to the Secretary General of the United Nations in the promotion of the campaign around the Sustainable Development Goals. And that made us shipmates, because I too performed that role for CARICOM with the SDGs, and the SDGs have been very close to us from then. But he's now Africa's and the global Africa's leading presidential voice on reparatory justice. In addition to guiding the African Union to agree that it shall form a joint orchestra with CARICOM so that all of global Africa can now speak with one voice on this subject. This is a seminal development. This is what we had all been struggling for decades, because we knew that so long as those enslaving nations saw CARICOM and Africa separately, that they could divide and rule us. And we fought decade by decade to see the moment when CARICOM and the African Union came together and spoke with one voice and proclaimed that from here on in, CARICOM and Africa will forever be speaking with one voice until this matter of justice is attained. So he's now our champion. And we were all standing behind him in celebration when he led the politics around the resolution that we won to declare, as you have heard, chattel slavery the gravest crime against humanity. This seminal achievement owes a great deal to our president's commitment, his oratory, and his effective intellect. I shall kidnap a few words from his speech and bring them into battle. This is what he said at the United Nations. I speak these words today not only for Ghana, but also in solidarity with the rest of Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, and the wider diaspora. And indeed, all people of good conscience throughout the world. This resolution is a pathway to healing and reparatory justice. Who could not vote in support of that? I marveled when I saw nations from all over the world, all of Asia, led by India and the Chinese, most of East Africa, most of East Europe, led by the Russians, most of East and West Asia, Latin America with one exception. 90% of the world coming together to say there has to be reparatory justice. Ladies and gentlemen, since then, President Mahama has convened the Next Step Summit in Accra. That is why we were there, to talk about the next steps. It wasn't just an empty resolution. The President is leading that conversation to create a program of action, leading inexorably to the negotiations. This is where we're at now. The case has been made. We are now in the stage of negotiations. And we will bring them to the table. If not in a block, one by one. The table is now ready. Minister Johnson, we are now ready for you. We're now over to the ministers and the foreign affairs and the governments. Negotiations are on the horizon. Mr. President, please.
Thank you. Kindly resume your seats. Thank you very much, Sir Hilary Beckles. Thanks for the kind introduction. And let me proceed on established protocol and say, my brothers and sisters, it was the favorite greeting of my former president, John Evans Atta Mills, of blessed memory. And I just make a few comments before I go into the statement that I have. The first, that I finished the University of Ghana twice for my first degree and my postgraduate. First in 1981, and for the postgraduate in 1986. I was very happy to hear Sir Hilary speak about the twinning between the University of West Indies and the University of Ghana. I'm a proud alumnus of the University of Ghana, and so I bring you greetings from your twin university. I was there recently for a congregation ceremony for the conferment of degrees on the graduate students, and it was a beautiful ceremony in the Great Hall. I'm sure you've been to the Great Hall many times. The second is that you told this little story about the Akans on this side of the pond. And I can assure you they are the same people, no difference, on the other side. They hate to be dominated, very rebellious. And I studied history for my first degree. And if you study the history of the Ashanti, their first war with the British was sometime in the early 1820s, 1829, I guess, and it was called the Battle of Nsamanko. At the time, Cape Coast and Elmina had become the main trading points in the trade with Europe, and so the ships used to come and buy items from Africa, for transport to Europe. And Ashanti controlled quite a good amount of commodities that were traded, especially gold. And so for many years, the Ashantis wanted to control the outlet that allowed them to control the trade with the Europeans. And so somewhere in the early 20s, the British had bought over the Elmina fort. And the Ashantis, as usual, attacked the Elmina fort. And they had the first battle with the British. It was called the Battle of Nsamanko. And the British governor was killed. He actually was decapitated, and his sword and skull were taken by the Ashanti. And so later, the British went and reorganized. And they had several battles with the Ashanti in the 1800s, because at the time, the British were struggling to begin the establishment of their colony. They called it a protectorate. And so they had what they called the Sagranti Wars with Ashanti. Sagranti is Sir Garnet Wolseley, who was the governor of the British. And so they had the Sagranti Wars, and it was about 3 or 4 battles. But in one of them, they managed to enter Kumasi and set Kumasi on fire, and then they exiled the king of Ashanti, Sir Prempeh, to Seychelles, together with Yasantua, the queen mother who led one of the wars. And so I'm just telling you that it's very typical. And so don't be surprised at the history of the rebellions that took place here by the Ashantis. And you can tell from the anthropology the similarity in terms of lineage, in terms of DNA, in terms of names, in terms of food. I mean, everything just shows the connection between Ghana and Jamaica. And so we're very happy to be here with you, and I thank Prime Minister Andrew Holness for the kind invitation to be with you. Additionally, I just want to add that it's not a privilege to request to be able to come back home to the motherland. It's a right. You spoke about the door of return, and we're there recently when we went for the next steps. We walked through the door and went onto the beach, and there was a reenactment of how the slaves were taken away. And the boats were there, they were loaded onto the boats. And it was a cross-section of the slaves, middle-aged, young men, young women, and even babies. There's a picture of me holding a slave baby, who was also going to be taken away. And like you said, they loaded them on these ships, and they packed them like sardines on their side, not on their backs, on their sides, so that they could take more in that space. And the men were shackled in the ship, and you had to lie there. I mean, you did your nature's call there. People vomited. It was, if you read some of the accounts of people who went down into the hold, they came back with such nausea because of the stench, And so the lucky ones survived. Many died in transit, and there are many who were thrown overboard in the Middle Passage. That is all history now. But then the other thing is that the women were not shackled. And why were they not shackled? Because the slave captains and others wanted to take advantage of them in the night. And so they selected the best and left them unshackled, so that in the night you come and catch one of them and take them to the captain's cabin. These atrocities are things that happened. They are historical truth. And so for me, the importance of the Assembly resolution is that we have it on record for generations yet unborn that the chattel enslavement of Africans is the gravest crime against humanity. And so that single victory is a victory for all of us. Before I came as a champion of AU reparations, we had been singing from different hymn sheets. We had been at the whole issue of reparations, but singing different orchestras, different symphonies. And so all that we achieved was to bring everybody together. And it was the cooperation with all of you, Sir Hilary, all of you, coming together. And once we started singing from the same hymn sheet, the world could not do anything but listen. And all of us, Ablakwa and several other people who volunteered, crisscrossed this world. There were times I called my foreign minister, "Where are you?" "Oh, I'm in Kazakhstan." I said, "What are you doing in Kazakhstan?" He said, "So the UN resolution." I left him in Korea. The next thing I heard, he was in some out-of-the-way country. And I asked him, I said, "What are you doing there?" He said, "So that's the center of that area. If we get them to vote, they'll bring the others along." But, we're all happy that we hit that historic milestone. I believe that it serves as the platform for us to move that dialogue forward. And like we always say, it's not just about financial compensation. It's about acknowledging, it's about expressing regret. It's about healing. It's about addressing the consequences of what slavery and colonialism did to our countries. It's about addressing those enduring consequences and changing the global order so that it gives us a fighting chance to create a better life for our people. And so I'm happy to have come to Jamaica. We all know the relationships that have existed between Ghana and Jamaica. Indeed, our first president of blessed memory, had always written and spoken about Marcus Garvey and the influence he had on him. When this whole Pan-African movement started, Marcus Garvey was a larger-than-life character in the whole Pan-African movement. And many of the leaders who eventually fought for independence took inspiration from him, because his cardinal vision was that it was time to end colonialism, and that it is Africans that will lead that battle to end colonialism. And indeed, that is what it was. Nobody was going to fight for independence for us. It had to take we ourselves to do the fight for independence. People were thrown in jail, and others were beaten, others were killed. Several of our veteran soldiers who had gone to the World War and just coming to demand their pension were shot in cold blood. And that is one of the events that triggered the rebellion in Ghana. And of course, after Ghana, it spread like wildfire across the rest of the continent. Today, all that is history. But that was a fight for liberation. But today, we're faced with a new fight. And that is why the relationships between us and visits like this are important. Because the battle that confronts us now is not the battle for liberation. We're independent anyway. The battle that confronts us is how we can cooperate to increase our economic development, create prosperity for our people. And so the battle now is the battle for economic emancipation. And I'm happy that I had the opportunity to visit Jamaica for the first time, the land of Marcus Garvey, but also the land of the prophet Bob Marley, who is one of my favorite artists. Indeed, we grew up on Bob Marley's music. And if we had a band, I probably would sing a few of his tunes here, but his songs inspire us. And especially the one that asks us to get rid of mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. And so, if you'll be patient, I'll just inflict this little speech on you, and then we'll take it from there. It's a great honor and privilege to be invited to this important dialogue at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. Allow me at the outset to express my warm appreciation to the government and people of Jamaica, and to the leadership of the University of the West Indies for convening this timely and significant dialogue on reparatory justice. The University of West Indies has for decades served as one of the world's most respected centers of scholarship and intellectual leadership on the history and legacies of the transatlantic enslavement of Africans, on colonialism, on racial injustice, and the quest for reparatory justice. Through your research, your advocacy, and public engagement, you have helped to shape global understanding of these issues and elevated the moral, legal, and developmental dimensions of the reparations discourse. As members of an extended historical family, the bonds between Africa and the Caribbean are profound and enduring. They were forged through one of the darkest chapters in human history, yet they've been sustained through extraordinary resilience, cultural creativity, and a common struggle for dignity, justice, freedom, and self-determination. Millions of Africans were violently taken away from their homes and communities and trafficked across oceans and subjected to a system of racialized chattel enslavement that reduced human beings into commodities. Entire societies were devastated, families were separated, cultures were disrupted, economic systems were distorted, human potential was systematically exploited in the service of imperial wealth accumulation. The transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans and the institution of racialized chattel enslavement were not accidental occurrences of history. They were organized systems of extraction, dehumanization, and racial domination, implemented over centuries and sustained by political, legal, financial, and commercial structures. The consequences of the transatlantic slave trade and racialized chattel enslavement of Africans did not end with emancipation. The inequalities created by slavery and colonialism continue to shape the patterns of wealth, opportunity, development, representation, and access across the global system. It's therefore important to underscore that the global discourse on reparations has reached a defining moment. The international community is increasingly moving beyond simple acknowledgement and historical wrongs, beyond simple acknowledgement of historical wrongs towards structured engagement on how their enduring consequences can be addressed. The central question before us is no longer whether historical injustices occurred. History has already rendered that verdict in the UN General Assembly resolution. The question now is how those injustices and their continuing effects should be addressed in a meaningful, sustainable, and forward-looking manner. Reparatory justice is not just about revisiting the past in isolation. It's about addressing the continuing consequences of that past. It is about correcting structural imbalances that continue to influence contemporary inequalities. It is about truth-telling. It's about healing. It's about taking accountability. It's about restoration of dignity and the creation of a more just and equitable global order. As I stated at a meeting of the African Union Assembly earlier this year, reparations involve not only financial compensation, but also restitution, rehabilitation, guarantees of non-repetition, historical accountability, and the restoration of the dignity and rights of African peoples and people of African descent. They must also encompass educational opportunities, cultural cooperation, and the amplification of African and diaspora voices in global affairs. As the African Union champion on advancing the cause of justice and the payment of reparations to Africans, I've sought to work closely with fellow Africans, the Caribbean, and other leaders, regional institutions, scholars, and civil society to advance this cause with purpose and determination. Ghana is committed to promoting a coherent, unified, and practical transcontinental position on reparations. Over the past several months, we've convened a series of strategic engagements that have brought together policymakers, historians, legal scholars, researchers, development practitioners, representatives of the African diaspora, women's groups, youth groups, and civil society organizations for constructive dialogues on pathways towards justice, accountability, healing, reconciliation, and the restoration of dignity for peoples of African descent. Throughout this process, we have remained committed to ensuring that discussions on reparations are grounded on evidence, guided by principle, and directed towards actionable outcomes. Our objective is clear. The engagement on reparative justice must evolve from simple moral arguments alone towards structured international engagements supported by institutional, legal, diplomatic, economic, and financial mechanisms capable of delivering tangible results. A major breakthrough occurred on 25th March 2026 when the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution ARES/80/250 on the declaration of the trafficking of enslaved Africans and racialized chattel enslavement of Africans as the gravest crime against humanity. 123 member states supported the resolution. This landmark resolution represents a historic achievement. For the first time in the history of the United Nations, the General Assembly adopted a resolution dedicated exclusively to the trafficking of enslaved Africans and racialized chattel enslavement. The resolution affirmed what generations of African, Caribbean scholars and activists and descendants of enslaved people have long maintained, that the crimes of the trafficking of enslaved Africans and racialized chattel enslavement of Africans was the greatest violation ever committed against any part of humanity, and that their consequences continue to shape our world today. The adoption of this resolution demonstrates the emergence of a broad international consensus that justice requires engagement with historical truth and its contemporary consequences. Recognizing that international recognition alone is insufficient, Ghana convened the high-level consultative conference on the next steps to the landmark UNGA resolution in Accra that took place from the 17th to the 19th of June. This conference brought together representatives of the 123 countries that supported the resolution. Regional organizations, academia, civil society, youth, leaders from Africa, and the diaspora. The principal outcome was the adoption of the Next Steps Commitment on Reparatory Justice. The Next Steps Commitments provide a practical roadmap for advancing implementation of the resolution and strengthening international cooperation on reparatory justice. They seek to move the discussion beyond recognition towards coordinated action. The commitments call, among others, for strengthened international dialogue, historical truth-telling, restitution of cultural properties, legal and institutional reforms, enhanced research cooperation, financial and development initiatives, and the creation of durable frameworks for pursuing reparatory justice at national, regional, and global levels. Importantly, the conference reaffirmed that reparative justice must be pursued through constructive engagements, partnerships, evidence-based policymaking, and respect for international law. One of the lessons of history is that transformative changes require institutions. Good intentions alone are not sufficient. And so for this reason, Ghana is supporting the establishment of institutional mechanisms capable of sustaining the momentum, coordinating research, informing policy, supporting diplomacy, and strengthening legal engagement on reparatory justice. The Next Step commitments welcome the establishment of a high-level Global Advisory Council on reparatory justice and 2 global expert panels, one on cultural restitution and the other for legal experts on reparatory justice. These are all designed to deepen work on historical research, cultural restitution, legal strategy, policy development, and international cooperation. Our goal is to ensure that rigorous scholarship, credible evidence, strong institutions, and effective multilateral engagement support the reparations agenda. No discussion of reparative justice can occur without acknowledging the extraordinary leadership of the Caribbean. For decades, Caribbean governments, academic, civil society leaders, and advocacy organizations have remained at the forefront of this movement. The work of the CARICOM Reparations Commission and the CARICOM 10-point plan have provided intellectual clarity, strategic direction, and a principled framework for advancing discourse internationally. I wish to commend Professor Sir Hilary Beckles and all those whose scholarship and advocacy have helped shape contemporary thinking on reparatory justice. Africa recognizes and values your leadership. Today, the convergence of African and Caribbean perspectives presents a historic opportunity to us. Together, we can build a unified and credible global position based on our shared history, our shared values, and our shared aspirations. African-Caribbean collaboration must therefore continue to expand across the following fronts. 1, coordinated advocacy in multilateral institutions. 2, joint historical and legal research. 3, academic exchange and knowledge production. 4, cultural cooperation and heritage restoration. 5, diplomatic engagement. 6, youth engagement and civic movement mobilization. And 7, development partnerships rooted in mutual respect and shared prosperity. Strengthening our partnership will enhance visibility, legitimacy, influence, and momentum for reparatory justice worldwide. The expectation of Africans and people of African descent continue to grow. Across Africa, the Caribbean, Americas, Europe, and beyond, there's an increasing call for action, accountability, and measurable progress. Our responsibility is therefore clear. We must translate dialogue into concrete outcomes. We must develop credible implementation mechanisms, explore sustainable financing approaches, and strengthen legal and institutional frameworks. And we must ensure that engagement remains constructive, practical, and inclusive. Meeting these expectations will require political will, sustained commitment, intellectual leadership, and collective resolve. History cannot be undone, but its consequences can be addressed. The injuries of the past cannot be erased, but justice can help to heal them. And through deliberate, coordinated, principled action, we can help create conditions for a more equitable future. As I conclude, permit me once again to commend the University of West Indies for convening this interaction. Let us continue to deepen our conversations. Let us strengthen the partnership between government, academia, civil society, and the African diaspora. And let us build upon the foundations laid by generations who refuse to allow truth to be forgotten. And let us approach the future with confidence and determination. I firmly believe that with unity of purpose, clarity of vision, and sustained international cooperation, meaningful progress on reparative justice can be achieved for present and future generations. I thank you for your kind attention.
Okay, very good people, it's your turn. Please warm your hands with another round of applause for the President. Mr. President, I was very intrigued by where you landed your presentation, that this reparatory justice movement that we've all committed ourselves to is it's not only about us. It's about the future of humanity. When we listen to some of the language in global politics, and when we hear things like, well, to solve this political problem, the nuclear option is still available. Just to imagine you're listening to political leaders speaking about nuclear war in an effort to solve a local political issue. And then we hear language just as obliterating the civilization. Yes. A people who have been building their culture for thousands of years, and you're going to have it obliterated. And then you realize that the mentality of genocide is still alive. So, Mr. President, we commit to this movement because we believe that it's a last chance for humanity to step back and say, listen, it's a human family, it's one planet, somehow we have to find a way to share it, but this jumping over the cliff with nuclear wars and so on is madness. So, Mr. President, so you can elaborate on that for us, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess you've said it all. If you look back, we had the arms race and East-West, the Cold War, the Iron Curtain. And with time, indeed I was in the Soviet Union at the time Gorbachev became the leader of the Soviet Union. And he began the whole idea of perestroika, glasnost and all that. And with time, the Berlin Wall came down, and West and Eastern Europe, virtually took down the Iron Curtain. It was a time of hope. Yeah. It was a time of excitement. And we said that with the arms race over, the nuclear dividend will provide enough resources to develop the whole world. Yes. I look back today and I think we're overly hopeful. Yeah, the world still has those extremes. If you see what's happening in Palestine, in Gaza, I mean, the genocide of the Palestinian people. Today, if you see what is happening on the West Bank, people who have long settled on ancestral lands, they've lived there for centuries. Suddenly, somebody comes and says, you should move from your land. And then they bring a bulldozer, bulldoze your house. And then the Israeli Defense Force comes and fights on behalf of the aggressor. Look at the meat grinder between Soviet Union and Ukraine. Young people march to their deaths. And then again, Iran and the US and Israel. And so it's disappointing. But for those of us who believe in a free, democratic world where multilateralism is still important, we must not lose hope. This is a time we should even come closer together. There are those who would want to disrupt the multilateral system so that they can run roughshod over everybody. The mightiest or the strongest rules. I mean, look at the recent slapping of tariffs on everybody without negotiation. Even some most benign countries like Canada. Canada is virtually like America's sidekick. And it's like a small brother who follows his big brother. And the kind of tariffs that are being slapped on Canada, I said, what did Canada do? Canada is your natural ally. Europe is your natural ally. It is the formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that has given the kind of influence that America wills. And suddenly you say NATO, you slap tariffs on NATO. I don't know, it's a mad world now, but we're hoping that calm will be restored somehow. Yes. We'll be cured of our mental illness, and calm will come back to the world.
and Mr. President, I made reference to the Strait of Hormuz, but if you look at images of those ships backed up in the strait trying to get out with the energy, and if you look at paintings and drawings of the slave trade in the 18th century, I mean, there are thousands of magnificent sketches in archives of the slave ships lined up outside of Elmina and Cape Coast, hundreds of ships lined up trying to collect their cargo and get out across the Atlantic. And the similarities in the imagery is really quite striking. What is also striking about those images of 200 years ago and today is the notion that, well, today energy is a source of production, and it's the oil. But 200 years ago, the energy, it was us. We were providing that energy to the agricultural systems of the world, to the industrial systems, and we were the oil. And the tankers trying to get through and the slave ships trying to get through, the imagery and the language is very, very similar. And the question about, you raised the issue of how the Africans were packed. In the 18th century, they had two concepts. One was called tight packing, one was called loose packing. A slave ship would take about 7 to 8 to 9 weeks to get to the Caribbean market. And ship captains, slavers, used to debate between themselves which method is more effective. If the ship has a capacity for 300 enslaved persons, if you loose back, so the ship has a capacity for 300, so you carry 200 and hope to get across the Atlantic as quickly as possible with a lighter weight, because these are sail ships. And the lighter the ship, the faster it's going to go. So captains would debate, and either way, you're going to lose 30%. So the average mortality on a slave ship was 30%. You're going to lose 30% in the Atlantic. So those debates are now very similar to what we are hearing in the Strait of Hormuz. Should the smaller, lighter tankers, do they get to market quicker than the big, heavy tankers? And it's a debate about efficiency, cost, and so on. For us historians, the language is so very similar. But at the end of it, Mr. President, I would say there's something called toxic racism. This is really something that happened during the slavery. And it's this toxic racism that continues to generate the kinds of politics that you have just described. So it is uprooting racism from global thinking that has to be an objective of reparation, reparatory justice.
Even the comparison of the two, I was watching the news some while back, and they had agreed on the 60-day ceasefire, and they said the Strait of Hormuz was open. But they said, even if the Strait of Hormuz was open, ships were not going to immediately start dashing through because they had to fix their insurance again. Like the slave ships, they had to take their insurance, make sure their insurance was in order before they started the crossing. And if they lost cargo, they claimed on their insurance. I mean, this was cargo, commodities. Our ancestors were commodities. And so if you lost 30%, like he said, it was a successful trip. If 30% of the slaves died, you had done a successful journey. I mean, these were lives. These were human beings.
And the Palestinian situation, Mr. President, you mentioned that how they say that one Jewish life is worth 1,000 Palestinian lives. Now, if you take Jamaica, the British brought 1.5 million Africans into Jamaica. 1.5 million Africans were brought here to Jamaica. At emancipation, there were only 300,000 remaining. So Jamaica had only about 17% of all the Africans who came here survive. And the question is, how do you reduce 1.5 million people to 300,000 after 200 years? Because what we do know is that populations reproduce. Yeah. People have sex, they have babies, and they live. Yeah. So if year by year you are losing 2,000 and you have to import 5,000 to replace 2,000, and year after decades. So in Jamaica, slavery was genocide. So it wasn't just the chattel slavery, it was genocide against the African people on this island. Yeah. And that's the point that we have made to the British government, that you didn't just enslave the Africans in Jamaica, you committed genocide here. 70 to 80% of the people you brought here were wiped out and didn't live past 40 years old. So that's another dimension: the slavery, the genocide, the racism, the economic exploitation. So, Mr. President, you have put together this global committee to steer the conversation. And you have said it should be practical, strategic. It should focus on economic development and social justice. Do you have a sense of the kind of timelines in which we could bring the enslaving nations to the table?
I think that some of them have started to open up, which is a good sign. After the resolution passed, many of the countries that abstained, have quietly reached out, and some publicly have reached out and said, look, we didn't vote for because we had some objections, this objection or the other, but fine. But we're ready to engage. And so I do think that it has had a positive effect. I won't say that this is an event and that we're going to wake up tomorrow and they're all going to come and line up and say, yes, we apologize. Yes, we're going to restitute. Yes, we're going to return all artifacts. It will take time, but we must be persistent about it. We must work at it. We mustn't get tired. And that's why we set up the expert panels to work consistently, and we'll continue to review the progress we're making. Of course, the legal committee would work out the legal pathways, and I'm pleased about the step Jamaica is taking, because that step is trying to use the justice system in England to make ask some questions, and I think that will trigger, something that is positive for the whole movement. And so I told Prime Minister Holness that Ghana completely supports Jamaica's move. We have many roads that lead to the same destination. And so this road Jamaica is taking must be fully supported.
Yes, and those of us in the region fully support it also. In fact, I remember meeting Prince King Charles, and he said to me, Professor, it's a pleasure to meet you. And I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, Your Royal Highness, I wish I could say the same. And he said, and why is that? And I said, well, okay. King Charles I is the one who declared that black people were not human beings. That was King Charles I. King Charles II was the one who legislated that black people, African people, should be classified as chattel and property forever and ever and ever. And I said, I'm just wondering what King Charles III have in store. I'm just wondering what King Charles III have in store for us. And he quite nicely said, oh, I guess you'll have to wait and see, won't you? So we are expecting him to come to Antigua and Barbuda for the Shogun. And we are expecting that he will bring good news. Isn't that correct, Lolita? We are expecting that he will come. He did say in Samoa that, what did he say? That reparations is a discourse whose time has come. Mm-hmm. And we have held on to those words. The Dutch government has apologized and said that they're ready to discuss reparations. The Germans have been trying to make amends in Namibia with what the genocide they committed there. The French President Macron has made a few statements, but it is hard to take his statement seriously until he addressed Haiti. Haiti is his domestic issue, and the home drums begin there. So I share your view, Mr. President, that there is a thawing of attitudes, and now what is required is very skillful political leadership to bring this matter to a conversation.
And if you read the anthropologists of the time who created the framework for people's conscience to sit easy when it came to slavery, was that we had all developed together as part of the human race, but at a point our developments stalled, and so we're a bit subhuman, than the other races. And I mean, that's justified. If you felt that you were more human than somebody, then it justified you treating the person. It's like you have a dog, you treat the dog, the way you want. And so it's sort of kind of justified some of the actions that took place. But you must also look at the dimensions where these were Christian nations, and so they had to make sure that their souls were not going to damnation because of slavery. And so all the papal bulls and the theological writings and edicts that made it okay that you could enslave a person, and that it had nothing to do with your soul going to paradise. You will still make heaven, however you treat this, subhuman thing. And that's how come the churches also got involved, not only in terms of creating the theological edicts, but also in owning plantations with slaves. There are many of the churches that own plantations and use slave labor. A lot of the generational wealth in this world was extracted from slavery. There are some of the wealthiest families, the biggest insurance companies that made their generational wealth from enslaving people. And so it's quite clear. I mean, what else do we need to say?
And Mr. President, one of the biggest challenges we're going to have in terms of raising public opinion, in Europe, they're very skillfully brainwashed their citizens to believe that all of the things that we are speaking about never existed. The average person on the streets of England have no idea what we're talking about. I can speak to it from both sides because I was a Windrush baby, and I went to school in England. And in my 4 years in high school, never once, never, ever, ever was slavery, colonization, imperialism, the empire, none of that was discussed in the schools. So we have a population that find incredible the things that we're talking about, but yet they're the ones who have the vote. They're the ones who the MPs have to respond to them, and they believe that this reparatory justice conversation is madness. Now, in France, surveys were done to show that 80% of the French population knows nothing about Haiti and what happened there. In Africa, what they have said to us, they said, well, to the extent that there was slave trading, we didn't go to Africa and kidnap people and enslave them. We bought them from the Africans. And they pushed that narrative down the throats of their own citizens. And even in the Caribbean and the diaspora, the educational system allowed black people to believe that they were sold by their own people. Now, it's an enormous uphill task to liberate the archives, because those of us who have spent our adult lives in the archives, I have a file that is about 6 inches thick with correspondence from the British government. The government, Whitehall, sending letters out to Elmina to instruct the British military that the following chiefs are obstructing the trade, and you must assassinate them, get rid of them. So we have the data of the British government sending messages to Africa that any chief or those chiefs who have been, or kings who have been blocking and fighting against the trade, they must be exterminated. You mentioned how King Pompey was exiled to the Seychelles. In the case of Nigeria, one of the African kings was exiled to Barbados, Jaja, King Jaja of Apobo, for fighting against the slave trade, fighting against control of the oil trade, and they grabbed him and threw him into exile in St. Vincent and then in Barbados. So destroying the African leadership, destroying the African political leadership was so important to them. And in many cases, where the trade was thriving, it was because they succeeded in wiping out the kings and queens who were defending their people and resisting. So that story now has to find its way into mainstream knowledge. So we have a huge educational project to undertake as well.
Yeah, and for them, they used it as a tool to divide and rule. And so they pushed that narrative in the Caribbean, in America. And so I've seen many black Americans wax lyrical about how you guys who remained there sold us into slavery.
Yeah.
And so it was a deliberate attempt to divide us and not let us speak with one voice on reparation. And the point I make is the Holocaust occurred, and I believe that there was a Holocaust and 6 million Jews were killed. Mm-hmm. Some of the most brutal prison guards were Jews. Some of those who went into the communities and showed where Jews were hiding and delivered them to the Nazis to be exterminated were Jews. Yes. But it doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen and that the Holocaust wasn't a crime against humanity. Yeah. And so even the argument that Africans were involved in enslaving Africans does not stop it from being the gravest crime against humanity. Correct. And the point is, you must look at all the legal underpinnings. You must look at everything that was established to support the slave trade in terms of the insurance of the cargo and all that kind of thing, the auctions and all that. It was a very systematic trade. And so you cannot wish it away just by saying that some agents, whom you use as agents to bring you slaves as commodities, participated in it, and because they were Africans, then it means that the slave trade didn't happen. No, we reject that.
Mr. President, there is a very strong correlation between the narcotics trade and the drug trade and the slave trade. Very strong parallels. You can start with realizing that the slave trade companies were some of the biggest corporations in the world. In the case of Britain, the Royal African Company was a huge conglomerate that owned hundreds of ships. It was a massive corporation. The royal family controlled most of the stock, but most of the British aristocracy owned the stock. This was a massive corporation. Today, these narcotics companies Some of them have more GDP, more capital, more cash. They have more armies than many countries. And when those narcotics come into our countries and destroying the lives of our young people, we do not manufacture them. How do they get into our countries? So we do know that the only way they get into our countries is because a small percentage of our citizens facilitate them. And it was the same in Africa. A small percentage of the people facilitated. So what you have is a global crime, and you cannot have a global crime without a local partner. You always need one or two local participants to enable a global crime to happen. But you do not write the history and say that because there were a few corrupt local people, that the nation is involved. I have never heard anyone write or said that the United States government is a drug trading government. Have you ever heard that? No. Have you ever heard anyone say that Britain or France or Germany is a drug trading nation? You will never hear that. But the drugs go in. They get in. So we have to untangle all of those issues to illustrate that this assault on African people has to stop. And I believe that academics are the ones who need to stop it, because the academics are the ones who wrote that kind of history knowing that it was propaganda. So we have to deconstruct all of that. We have Professor Stanley Nair who's here. Professor Stanley Nair is the director of the Center for Reparation Studies. And our university is probably the only one in the world that has a Center for Reparation Studies. And all of that work that needs to be done now, we are going to task our center to reconstruct this history and this narrative, get rid of the mythologies and all of the dishonesties, and allow truth to emerge.
Mr. Vice Chancellor, I am, with profuse apologies, obliged to say the President has a 6:30.
Okay.
And if we are going to ask our very patient and engaged audience to propose at least 2 questions.
Yes.
I am going to...
Thank you for your intervention.
Thank you so much.
We were getting a bit carried away up here. So, okay, thank you, madam. That's why we love our women. Thank you. Can we have a few short, please no lectures, a few quick ones to the President? Where's the mic? A few quick ones, okay? And then we will take a few online and we'll wrap up.
Okay, so, good evening. Good evening, Mr. President. Good evening, sir. So this is my question to you. As the mechanisms of reparations are implemented over time, how do we prevent corruption and neocolonialism from further deepening the wound that we are trying to address? Last October, Jamaica suffered a very catastrophic hurricane, and there has been a lot of controversy about how humanitarian aid has been handled. And how do we prevent the hypocrisy of certain governments from increasing apathy towards reparations? How do we prevent the academic bubble from preventing this discussion from spreading to where it needs to go? Yes, there's apathy as a result of a lack of accessible information, because we too have been force-fed lies that would absolve our oppressors of accountability. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, would you wish me to say a quick response to that?
Yeah, I think we should. It takes a lot of work. We should emancipate our minds from mental slavery. The twin effects of slavery and colonialism are still enduring, and that is part of the challenge our nations face. And we are now independent. We should be able to tell our children the truth. When I was growing up in primary school, the abolitionists were put as the most important thing that happened in the slave trade. We were taught about the slave trade. The gravity of what happened in the slave trade was never really spelled out. It was the bravery of the abolitionists and how they were the knights in shining armor who came and stopped it and saved Africans. And so all these people who were involved in the abolition movement were lionized in our history books. Now we can begin to tell our children the truth. And I think that since the resolution was passed on the General Assembly, it's piqued interest in trying to understand and know what exactly happened. And I believe that awareness is being created. People are aware of what happened. And it helps for you to know where we have come from, because that informs where we are going. And I believe that with the kind of work that Sir Hilary Berkels and co are doing, and he said academia must deconstruct the wrong story and put out the right narrative so that generations, current generations and generations yet unborn can find out the truth about what happened.
Thank you. We'll have one over here, and then Minister Johnson, we'll wrap up. Don't panic.
Right, yes. In the spirit of being short, I just ask, well, it's exciting that the political opportunity window for us to discuss reparations has opened finally again. What is our plan for ensuring that the countries who are responsible for delivering our party justice do follow through, even though it is not politically convenient for them, it's actually detrimental, it's economically unviable for them, but how do we encourage them to continue with it despite it being, on the face of it, terrible for them?
Before, it was taboo to talk about it. They didn't want to hear. You could not discuss it in any international forum. Today, that door is open, and we intend to keep that door open. We have our foot in the door. We're going to squeeze our shoulder into the door, and we'll open that door wide.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we break this important conversation to a close, I wish to express our sincere appreciation to His Excellency and our Vice Chancellor for an engaging, thoughtful, and forward-looking dialogue on reparatory justice. Please give our two distinguished presenters a tremendous round of applause. I know I have 2 minutes, so I will be quick. This evening's discussion has reminded us that reparatory justice is not simply about revisiting the past. It is about confronting the enduring consequences of slavery, colonialism, and racial injustice, and determining how we build a more equitable future for Africa, the Caribbean, and the people of African descent across the world. It challenges us to move beyond acknowledgement towards action, and beyond expressions of regret towards meaningful repair. The conversation has also reinforced the historic and contemporary bonds between Africa and the Caribbean. As His Excellency has reminded us, our histories are intertwined, and so too are our aspirations. There is enormous potential for our regions to deepen collaboration for research and policy implementation for sustainable development. As His Excellency said, we now have to emphasize economic emancipation, and we speak together with a stronger collective voice on the global stage. We are proud of our esteemed researchers at the Center for Reparation Research at the UWI for their continued excellent research and advocacy. As Mrs. Davis-Mattis has said, greater things are ahead. The next phase of reparatory justice must be characterized by the implementation of practical and measurable proposals for repair, ensuring that the movement translates into tangible improvements in the lives and development prospects of affected communities. Your Excellency, your presence and your reflections have added significantly to this ongoing global conversation. We are deeply grateful for your leadership and for Ghana's important contribution to strengthening ties with the Caribbean and advancing the cause of people of African descent. To our Vice Chancellor, thank you for your leadership and for ensuring that the University of the West Indies continues to provide intellectual leadership on one of the most defining justice issues of our time. Thank you to our Minister and to Mrs. Davis-Mattis for the express commitment to preparatory justice. I believe, Minister, you have a tool here, this dialogue, a recorded tool for us to give our CXC students and our history students. Thank you to all our government and university staff who made this event a success, and to everyone who has joined us both in person and online. Thank you for your participation and your engagement. Ladies and gentlemen, let us continue the dialogue, and let each and every one of us commit to advancing reparatory justice from aspiration to achievement. Greater things are ahead. Thank you, and I wish you all a very pleasant evening.